It's time to get wild, and I don't mean the fun way, unless you find being terrorized by mysterious creatures, psychotic strangers, and ethereal specters exciting. Today we're heading back into the great outdoors to see what kinds of nightmares Mother Nature has in store for us. Better wear your orange reflective vest. At least it will make finding your remains easier. Enjoy these stories, and be sure to send us your scariest experiences at darkstories.org. I'd love to hear some encounters with skinwalkers and tales from survivalists. Follow the Darkness Prevails podcast on Spotify and iTunes to never miss another episode. By the way, which video game characters or enemies unnerved you the most when you were a kid? For me, it was those Wallmaster giant hand things from Zelda Ocarina of Time. Now, let's begin. It Stood Behind Me, from Luke B. This happened some years ago, but it has stayed with me ever since. When I was around 15 years old, my family decided to take one of our regular trips to the Drakensberg mountain range of South Africa. We ourselves live around 2 hours away in the town of Durban. My grandparents had owned a plot of land in the area for an incredibly long time, before I or my parents were even born, and they told me that they have never experienced anything out of the ordinary in the area. Right next to the plot of land, there is a river that can and often does get extremely full, but it's mainly used for swimming and fishing. This plot of land is also located next door to a nature reserve, and that nature reserve starts about 20 meters from the bank on the other side of the river. The nature reserve isn't anything extreme, and doesn't hold a large majority of the Big Five: elephants, rhinos, leopards, lions, and buffalo. But there have been reports of leopards and hyena returning to the area, which makes sense due to the large population of baboons in the area. I love to spend time outdoors, so one day during our stay at my grandparents' plot of land, I deeply wanted to go hiking, so I began to ask all the members of my family if they wanted to accompany me. My brothers both said no. My parents said they were busy, so did my grandparents, and even my cousins were busy. So I made the fateful decision to go for a hike by myself. I didn't know that going for a lone hike would result in one of the most terrifying moments of my life, and that it would stay with me till this very day 7 years in the future. As I set out into the Drakensberg mountain range, I stopped to take in the majesty of the wilderness. Out here, the world is empty of people, cities, and roads. It's deathly quiet, except for the odd bird call and gurgling of the river. I began by following the river upstream to the foot of the closest mountain. This went off without much of a problem. I walked on, enjoying the peace and quiet. As I got to the foot of the mountain, I looked up, and I could see small black spots rushing around on the mountainside. I could hear the distinct call of the Chakma baboon. They were barking at me, which was to be expected as I was an intruder in their habitat, but I wasn't concerned. These baboons are not used to humans, so much so that they never come very close and were unlikely to try and hurt me. I continued walking around the base of the mountain, the baboons seeming to follow me. They were making sure I wasn't trying to sneak up on them, I guess. Not that I would do that. As I walked around the mountain, the baboons slowly started leaving me alone when they realized that I wasn't a threat. Soon it was peaceful again, and I continued walking. After about 30 minutes, I came across a small outcrop of rocks that I had never seen before. I've been walking this area since I was around 5, and I was very accustomed to it. The rocky outcrop made a sort of shallow cave, and you could see the back from the opening. I decided to go inside and look around. Inside, there was one of the most amazing things I'd ever seen. All along the walls were rock paintings, beautiful paintings depicting daily lives of hunter-gatherers in the area, long since integrated into society. I continued to walk around the cave until I came to the deepest part and looked upon the wall. On the wall was another cave painting, but this one was different. This one was strange. I could not make out what it was depicting, but it was definitely painted with something that wasn't normal. It looked like blood. I could feel a sort of energy or some sort of power emanating from the painting. I reached out and touched the wall, and I regret doing that. Because when I did, I felt something standing behind me. At first I thought, okay, maybe it's a baboon. Maybe one of them got curious and followed me in. But I can't stress enough, it was not a baboon. I turned around and the first thing I saw was a dark black mass. It was blocking the entrance to the outcrop of rocks. I looked up and I saw its head. This beast, this massive hulking thing, had a cow's skull for a head, but the teeth were that of carnivores, much like dog teeth. Its eyes were what looked like red lights glowing in its skull, and I could tell that this creature was old, extremely old. Considering the odd painting on the wall and what it appeared to be made of, I couldn't help but think I had summoned this thing here, that the cave painting was the key to why this creature was here. But I was still stuck in the back of this outcrop with nowhere to go. This creature looked directly at me, and its mouth began to open slowly. Out of its jaws slithered a long gray tongue. Black sludge poured from its mouth, and I swear it began to speak, but I could not make out what words it was saying. The sound this creature made was like wet gravel scraping against metal, but I knew it was talking to me. I was so shocked, so terrified, I could not move. My legs locked in place. My back pressed against the wall of the outcrop, it stepped forward, not making a sound now. Its arm reached out from the black mass that was its body, eyes glowing brighter. It reached for me, and before it touched me, I blacked out. I woke up a few hours later, outside the area where the outcrop was, but the outcrop was gone. Nowhere to be seen. I have no idea what I saw, and I have no idea what it said to me, but I feel that what I encountered was something like a skinwalker or wendigo. But what I can tell you is that I still see the creature to this day. Whenever I have bouts of sleep paralysis, this is what I see, and I know now that I will never forget it, and I may always see it. He Follows, from Forrest S. I have to start by stating I love the outdoors and nature. If given the option of going for a day on the town or being out in the woods, I would choose the woods every time. I live in a small coastal town in California. The beach itself is less than 20 minutes away from the town, and everything is surrounded by wooded hills with a river that runs through. It's beautiful here, really. Lots of places to see and explore if you like the outdoors. I'm out there anytime I can, and it was one of those times when I noticed him. I was out one day hiking along the riverbed, wandering aimlessly really, when I noticed there was a smell. It was something I had never smelled before while hiking. It was sweet smelling, overbearingly sweet. It's difficult to explain beyond that, but it wasn't from anything that would normally be out in those woods. And I had to know what was making the smell. so I kept wandering and sniffing here and there to try to pinpoint what was making it. After a while, with no luck, I stumbled upon a clearing I'd never seen before, hidden away within the trees. The smell was very strong from this spot, but no matter how hard I searched, nothing in the spot seemed to be making that smell. I'd given in to the idea I would not figure out what was causing it, and I decided I was going to take a selfie while in the new spot so I could remember it later on before I left. As I began to head back, I pulled my cell phone out. I was adjusting the camera while walking, and that's when I saw it. Or him. Barely, anyway. There seemed to be someone on the path about 30 feet behind me. I hadn't heard them approaching, and I watched in alarm as the figure I glimpsed noticed I stopped walking. In response, they ducked low to the ground, hiding in the tall grass. This set off many alarms for me. I was alone deep into the riverbed. Tons of trees and woods separated me from town and other people. I stood, shaking as I tried to zoom in on my phone camera to see what the person behind me was doing. It wouldn't give me a clear view of what they were doing though, which just made me more afraid. Suddenly, I felt angry for panicking. Panicking wasn't going to help in this situation. So I turned around, glaring at the spot this person was hiding. I wanted to make them think I wasn't afraid of them, and I hoped they would think that too. I stood there, unmoving, hoping they would get the point. They seemed to notice I knew they were there, and I watched as they slowly began to rise up, and the panic returned full force. It became clear very quickly that whatever had been hiding in that grass was not a human stalker. It was tall even at this distance as it raised to its full height. This thing had a tall, dark gray body and antlers atop its head. It had no clothes on and seemed like it was almost showing off at this point, like it was saying it didn't care that I was looking at it. I felt too stunned to move, as the thing then took a few steps towards me on 2 legs. Run. My mind screamed, "Run now!" I wanted to listen, but it seemed like my legs just would not let me move. I stood watching as my heart pounded. It began to walk closer, taking its time to get to me. When it stopped, it then tilted its body sideways in a very exaggerated manner, like it was trying to see behind me. It stayed like that for a few moments before quickly snapping back up. With one last look at me, it quickly sidestepped into the trees and out of sight. It felt as if my heart had stopped. What had just happened? What was that thing and where did it go? Why did it tilt its body like that? Numerous questions ran through my mind. Was it going to come back? There was the sound of twigs snapping behind me. I whirled around in a panic to see there was a group of hikers coming closer. They seemed just as surprised to see me as I was of them. I must have looked panicked, because one of the women there asked me if I was all right. I looked like I was about to cry. I didn't know what to say to her or any of them about the thing I just saw. I didn't know what it was or if it was dangerous, but I knew I didn't want to walk back out of the woods alone, or for them to walk that way, so I lied to them. I said I was being followed by a large animal, that I thought a mountain lion was stalking me. We do have mountain lions and bears here. Lots of wildlife, really. The other hikers seemed alarmed as I pointed further ahead, stating it was not too far that way, and they shouldn't head that direction. They all agreed and asked me if I wanted to head back and walk with them to keep safe. I agreed, and we all made our way to the outskirts of town. I'm grateful for those other hikers showing up when they did. I'm not sure what it was or what it wanted, or how long it had been following me through those woods. But I know he's there now, and I know he or it is probably still watching people. Haven turned to hell. From Anonymous. I'm a 15-year-old female from the UK, and I've always been a bit of a nature fanatic. From a very young age, my parents have taken myself and my younger siblings to forest parks, National Trust estates, and the like. It was in one of these forest parks that I felt most at home. Until last year, that is. Almost every weekend, my family and I would go for walks and picnics in this forest. It is, in my opinion, the most beautiful place on earth. It was on one of these picnic weekends that I experienced the following horror. Sometime in mid-July of 2019, when the weather was cloudy but warm, it was the perfect time for a picnic and walk. We found our usual patch of grass over to the far left of a clearing, where we were able to keep an eye on the younger children who were busy climbing trees. After eating lunch and playing with my sisters and cousins, I decided to head up to the top of my hill. The location of the hill was about 15 or so meters to the back left of where the climbing trees were, and was a relatively steep hike to get to the top, but the end result was always worth it. The top of Rhododendron Hill was always full of life. From the breeze in the trees and singing birds, there was always pleasant noise. But not today. As soon as I reached the top of the hill, I stopped. It was completely silent. I couldn't hear a thing. No birds, no wind, nothing. My usually peaceful yet buzzing haven didn't feel the same. It gave off this foreboding vibe that weighed heavily on my chest. I began to feel unexplainably uncomfortable. I came to the conclusion that as it was a slightly busier day, the wildlife was simply keeping its distance, so I headed over to a low log and sat down. Suddenly, there was this awful stench in the air. It smelled like the time my mom had left uncooked chicken in our fridge when we were on holiday, leaving it to rot. The smell made me so nauseous that I had to turn to my right and empty my stomach. After bringing my lunch back up, I raised my head slightly and looked directly in front of me. What I saw scared the living daylights out of me. About 3 meters in front of me was this rhododendron tree that was about a meter off the ground. Beneath all the leaves and flowers were these 2 humongous, hairless gray paws. I stared at the paws for a few minutes and was beginning to calm down when a thought occurred to me. Wait, why are there only 2 paws? The second after I thought this, they moved. It was only a slight movement, but still enough to make me want to get my butt back down that hill. I had just stood up and had slowly began to back away when I heard the most bizarre thing. "Help me, Marcy." That was my dad's voice, but at the same time, it wasn't. My dad wasn't here, he had to work. So who in the world was that? "Help me, Marcy." It came again, this time dragging out my nickname. At this point, I had backed up against a tree, too shocked and confused to move. Now, whatever was behind that tree had moved again. This time I was able to see everything, although I really wish I hadn't. The paws I saw previously were the same, but the legs were all wrong in relation to the size of the paws. They were too thin and skinny, and it looked like it had bought the wrong size skin as it hung off in places. The torso was almost human, but was grayish in color, and once again too skinny, so much so that its ribs were on full display. The creature's arms looked murderous, though, with long clawed hands at the end of arms that appeared to reach past its knees. Its head, however, made my blood run cold. It had the head of a wolf, or something that resembled one anyway. Its snout was rolled back into a chilling grin, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. It was the eyes that terrified me the most, however, as they appeared almost human in shape. They were hazelnut brown and stared right into my soul. I felt myself begin to feel less afraid, and more as though I should walk towards it. I can't recall what I did after that, but the next thing I knew, I was sprinting down the hill at full speed as I heard the most bone-chilling screech. It was like a woman's cry, but crossed with a wolf howling and other animal screams. It almost sounded slightly static. Once I made it to the bottom of the hill, my uncle had come running up to me. "Was that you screaming?" he asked me. I couldn't get anything out, so I just shook my head. After that, I blacked out. I woke up 2 days later in my own bed, with my parents and uncle crowding me. From what I could gather, for they were all speaking at once, I had blacked out after reaching the bottom of the hill. They had heard the scream too and thought that I was hurt. Then my mom ranted about how scared she was when she saw me unconscious and how she thought that I was never going to wake up. You know, the usual worried parent stuff. Then my uncle asked if he could speak to me alone for a minute. He went on to tell me that once I passed out, he noticed a figure at the top of the hill from where I ran. He mentioned that he knew exactly what it was. He didn't tell me its name, as he said that's what draws it to you, but he simply said it was he who walks on all fours, or something like that. That day wasn't brought up again between us. The reason I'm posting this now is that I found out last week that my uncle was killed by a bear on a hunting trip over in the US, where he's originally from. In his will, he left me some old photo albums, a sum of money, but weirdly enough, he left me a load of his old notebooks. It took me a couple of days to bring myself to read them, but when I did, I was astonished. He had books filled with his notes on skinwalkers and Wendigo and other folklore stuff. He had also left me a letter, which read, "Hey, nutcase, listen, I know you must be confused at all this stuff, but since you're 16 now, I think it's time I told you the full story of what that thing you saw that day at the forest park was. I've done a lot of traveling through America over the years, and that thing you saw was there for me. It had been stalking me from 2013. Don't know how to get rid of it, but I will. However, it's seen you now, and I don't mean to frighten you, but it could be after you now, too. If this letter gets to you before your 16th birthday, then it must mean I'm dead. If that's the case, then I'm so sorry, Amara. Just know that I love you very much, and I hope that my notes help you, even if only a little. Lots of love and hugs from Uncle Graham." Although the note was short and crinkled, it still broke my heart to read. He must have been planning to tell me himself, but had to make sure I knew what the books were about, in case he never got the chance. So far, I haven't seen that thing again, but if I do, well, at least I know more than I did the first time. Let my story be another example to you of why you should always be cautious in the woods and never go places alone or without protection of some sort. Maybe some of you would want to stay out of them in general, as I do now. This world is full of mysteries that we don't understand. One thing that I constantly question, however, is was it really a bear that killed my uncle, Or was it something else? Something far more sinister. Creepy Woods Creature from Angela W. I'm going to share my experience from what I can recall. It was 2002 and I was walking with some friends through the woods. Suddenly, my friend Sam screamed. We all ran over to her, and I noticed she fell over a tombstone and got a good scrape on her knee. I was amazed that we somehow stumbled into an unmarked cemetery. After all, I've lived in this town outside Houston for almost 7 years, and I've heard nothing about a random cemetery in the middle of the woods. Sam finally got up from the ground, whipping the dirt off herself. My friend Jess then yelled, "Hey, get over here. Look at what this tombstone says." "Witch heretic beware," I read aloud. No name. And beware of what? We walked around the cemetery. Some tombstones were marked with just stones, and much of the text had been eroded and rubbed off from age. The ones we could read were creepy. It seemed that all the graves were from supposed witches, devils, Jezebels, and monsters. Just creepy. I never came across any kind of cemetery like this before. We walked around the stones when my friend Lacey said, "Hey, do you hear that?" We all went silent, even held our breaths. Then we heard a whisper. "Run." Sam spoke up. "Did someone just say run?" We all huddled together, scared. I could feel Lacey squeezing my hand so hard it was going numb. Sam continued, "Do y'all see a shadow on your right? A tall one?" We looked over, and I did in fact see a tall, dark figure in the trees. Either it was actually 8 feet tall, or my eyes were playing tricks on me. No, it was tall, and it was getting closer. Lacey spoke. "What is that smell? Smells rotten. Ripe. Like, I don't know, it's burning my eyes." The whisper came again. It was louder this time. "Run." We were not going to be told a third time. We ran so fast until we realized that we were lost. "Please don't stop. Something's right behind us," Lacey said. I turned towards her. All I could say was, "What in the—" When I saw it, something inhumanly tall, with whitish grayish skin, and that ungodly smell had been coming from it. Better yet, it had no eyes, just dark holes. The same could be said for its lips, which were just a thin line. I screamed loud enough to tear up my throat, and we all began to run. We heard a voice, distorted, almost human, behind us. "Hello, stop." We soon made it to a road, and to our luck, there was a family in a truck changing a tire. They were kind enough to allow us to ride in the bed of the truck. As we did, we were all trying to calm ourselves and catch our breaths. We never talked about that night again, and we all eventually drifted apart. As for that entity we'd seen, I realized it must have been 7 or 8 feet tall or so. It had grayish pale skin, with an odor that smelled like a herd of rotten deer. Its skin was sagging, as if its skin didn't fit, and it had round eyeless sockets. When it yelled at us saying "Hello, stop," it seemed its voice was trying to mimic a person, but I can't be sure. All I can say for sure is to beware of any random cemeteries in the dark around Houston.